Good evening, everybody out there. This is Frank G. Welcome to the second episode of Late Night with Frank G. I am Frank. I am also the host of the Let Me Bend Your Ear podcast. So, normally I do episodes of the podcast. What I'm doing tonight in the second episode of Late Night is kind of do a free form, kind of live, quick talk show here. If anybody wants to come on and join me, that'd be great. I'm going to put a link in the chat room. I am live now on the Facebook page for the show, which is facebook.com/ Let Me Bend Your Ear. Then, of course, YouTube is Let Me Bend Your Ear podcast. I'm live there as well. I'm also live on the Twitter page, which is at Bend Your Ear Pod. I'm also live now on Twitch. So on the inaugural episode of this show, I had somebody chat with me in the chat room over Twitch, which was nice because I didn't think anybody was seeing me on there at all. So that was kind of a big surprise. So this show is basically, like I said, a free-form talk show where I discuss movies, just like my podcast. I'm not going to have a review in this show. This is really more of an open forum for me to discuss certain things about movies. I will start by leading you, of course, to the podcast. If you are looking for a new movie podcast, if you're watching out here now, the Let Me Bend Your Ear podcast is available wherever you get audio podcast. It's specifically on Spotify, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, Stitcher, TuneIn, Castbox, Amazon Music, and on Podbean. You can also get all the episodes of this podcast from episode 1 through my most current episode, which is the discussion and review of the Albert Brooks film, Defending Your Life. The website is letmebendyourear.com. All the episodes are available there to download. And then the last about 10 video episodes are available on the website as well. It'll link you to the YouTube channel. So I would also ask if you would subscribe to the YouTube channel there, build my subscriber base there. Like I said, you can watch the shows live when I record. If you subscribe on YouTube, you'll get a notification when I do go live. And like I said, every time I go live on the podcast and here tonight on the free form of the late night show, you can chat with me actually 3 different ways. You can chat with me just through chat. I'm going to put the link up in here, or you can just write a chat if you have a question about movies or you want to talk about movies. Like I said in the previous episode, we had someone come on through the chat, and we were talking about Denis Villeneuve, the director of Dune, Blade Runner 2049, and kind of we're discussing his work. So whatever you want to talk about movie-wise, I'm down for that. So if you want to do that, you can just chat in the chat room if you're watching, like I said, either on Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, or on YouTube. And I'll see your questions here. I'm going to put the link up in a moment. If you actually want to come on, that's what I would love for you to do. Just click on the link that I put into the chat room, or ask me for the link if you don't see it. Super simple. You don't need to download anything. It's not a Skype call. This allows me to do it based in the browser. All you need is a computer or a phone with a browser. You click on the link. It lets me know you're here, and we can either have you come on audio only, which is fine. I would love for you to come on video as well. We can come live and you'll be on split screen with me. Like I said, we can even have more than one person come on. We have a couple people come on if we have a chat with more than one person, which would be fantastic. Or again, like I said, if you just want to chat like I did in the last episode, that's fine as well. Like I said, I'm going to probably be on here maybe a half hour, maybe a little bit less, unless we get some conversation. If we get some conversation, I can go longer. I'm a late owl. I'm a night owl. So this is why I'm doing it here. This is the best opportunity for me to record both the podcast and this show. And I also wanted to address via the podcast, I know, and I've posted on this as well, but I want to kind of reiterate it. I've gone through some challenges with the audio quality. The audio is good, is where you hear me fine. It's clear, but I know there's been an annoying and recurring popping noise over the last couple of episodes. It's probably going to be in the next couple of episodes that I've recorded that are already in the queue. I think I've resolved the problem. And I'll know really after this late night episode tonight if I have resolved the problem. I'm going to listen back to this one, but I think I figured out what it was. I was having an internet issue that needed some change of hardware. So make a long story short, I think I've resolved the audio issue. I'll know for sure after this episode tonight and I listen back to it. If you do come on tonight and chat and happen to see or hear anything, let me know. I'll probably bring it up a couple more times in this episode once people start to come on, if I get any viewers or listeners tonight. So I'm going to I didn't really have any topics per se, other than, like I said, I've seen a lot more movies lately to try to build up the podcast. So what I finally have been able to do after doing this podcast for 3.5 years in July and August, or I think June actually is my anniversary. It'll be the 4th anniversary of the podcast. I'm I'm more than 3.5 years in, and I've never been able to really, because of various things that have happened. And anybody that does a podcast can understand this. I've been unable to record multiple episodes in a short period of time to build episodes into the queue. So about a year ago, I made a decision to change the format of the podcast or adjust it. So when this podcast first opened, if you start to listen to it, I've had some people start from the beginning. If you start from the beginning, the history of this podcast, Let Me Bend Your Ear, was it was the three topics that I loved the most: sports, politics, and movies. And up until about a year ago, probably a year around this time, I was doing that format. So each show would be about a different topic. First, I started with trying to do all three in one episode. Then I started to dedicate one each episode to one of those three topics. And last year, I had found I was not able to, because I want to make this a weekly podcast, and I have been able to do that actually over the last, probably 6 months or so, that I've had an episode come out at least every week for the most part. But there were times where I had significant breaks because I was busy or things are going on. If I've said in the podcast before, I have 2 small children. They do things. It's a busy schedule being a parent of small kids, or kids of any age, school age, where you have to take them to things and things like that. And of course, the other things too is I record late at night, like I'm doing this late show. So about a year ago, I made the decision to change the format to do just movies. And for a couple of reasons. One, I wasn't really able to keep up the commitment of finding topics all the time of the three. And then I was leaning into doing the movie ones because that's my biggest comfort zone. That's where I'm able to watch movies at my leisure or whenever I can and then review them. And secondly, I think having the three topics was hurting the podcast in the sense that, not that I didn't enjoy it, I love doing it, but it was hurting the podcast because I think if I want to build an audience, which is of course what I want to do, like I said, I enjoy doing this podcast regardless of one person listens or however, but obviously I want to build it. It's a podcast. It's a medium. In this case now it's a visual and an audio medium for me. I want people to engage and to watch it and to grow that audience. And I think having those three topics was hurting it because it wasn't focused enough. It's not, I'm an independent podcaster. I'm not a famous person doing a podcast where I could talk about a bunch of different subjects because people would know who I am. I think for me, that's going to hurt. So I decided to make the focus, because most of the podcasts I listen to that I'm a big fans of, and I'm talking about independent ones per se, or even ones that are done by people that are very famous. Most of them have a singular focus, whether it's movie reviews, whether it's politics, whether there's a singular focus of the podcast, which I think is beneficial. So I made that decision, and I'm glad I did. So that was the first piece of kind of evolving the podcast. So secondly, in the last year, I started to embrace the video element of this. And I understand, like I said, when I do these live shows, whether I record the podcast or whether I'm doing something like this late night show, I may not get any viewers that come on or people that come in real quick and leave if they happen to be scanning or scrolling wherever they're at, whether it's on Twitch or on Facebook or on YouTube, and they see it, not interested, they move on. That's fine. But what I love about the video component, I was a little intimidated by it at first because I don't, this has always been an audio podcast. It always will be. But I'm having fun doing the video element. I've had, on a couple of occasions, people engage me doing it. But it's another way to try to grow the audience. And it's another way to provide content of this show, another variation of it. Because I do know a lot of people consume, even podcasts on YouTube and, through video as opposed to audio, which is fine. And like I say, even if I only get a few people, that's fine. I enjoy really doing this. And now that I have the means and the technology and the software to stream and pull that audio and pull that video. Another reason I've done it as well, frankly, is to make it simple. If I can give any advice to any people that are starting podcasting, I will say this, and I've talked about it before. At the beginning, when I launched the podcast, I was really focused on how many downloads I had. And, when you start, of course, you get no downloads because nobody knows you're doing a podcast, and it starts to drip. You get dribs and drabs of it. And I was really focused on trying to make a technically professional sounding podcast. And that took a lot of my time, a lot of my focus. And what I was finding was I was losing, not that it was never not fun, but I was getting more focused on how many people were downloading the show as opposed to with the content I was putting out. Not that I didn't care about the content, but it for a short period of time there, it was getting to the point where I was more focused on that, and it wasn't fun. And I wanted to start this podcast because I had a podcast a few years back called Critic from the Couch, where I was doing strictly movie reviews, kind of what I'm doing now. And I did it for a short period of time and then kind of let it go by the wayside. Life happens, things happen. So when I did the relaunch of this podcast, I was really looking for an outlet for me personally. I think I was having some personal struggles just with finding things outside of what I do for a living, which is irrelevant, but something that I enjoy doing that I look forward to. And I'm glad I relaunched the podcast and really committed to it. So when I was really getting caught up in the downloads and the things like that, it was taking away the fun of doing it. And I realized that. And then I went from trying to be, and not high tech, because that's actually giving it too much credit, but trying to be focused on how making it perfect audio wise. I got rid of that and focused on the content and focused on finding the easiest way to record the podcast so I can get episodes out. And when I made that shift, for me, it was fantastic. It would be great to have a podcast studio or high grade audio and video equipment to do it. But I was using a simple microphone. I have a Chromebook computer, and I was making episodes. They sounded fine. And once my focus shifted away from the technical and the download piece of it, it became a lot more fun. And as it's evolved, especially over the last year, it's really become a source of joy for me. Not that it wasn't before, but I think I was putting obstacles in my way to kind of detract from how much fun it is to actually do the podcast. So for me, it's been fantastic, especially in this last year, and which is leading up to what I was starting to. I'll digress here, but what's happened now is I'm finally been able to, in the last couple of weeks, to record multiple episodes in a week. So now that I have episodes built up in the queue, because the ultimate goal of the show, and which is what I've always had to do, wanted it to be, and I haven't been able to, is to make sure that I put out an episode every single week. And now I'm actually able to do that. Now I've got episodes going at least for the next 4 to 5 weeks. I want to continue to build that library so that every single Friday you get a new episode, not only for the people that have committed to listening to the podcast, but to try to get new people and to build up the content. Because I'm going to hit 100 episodes here in a couple of weeks, and it's taken me almost 4 years to do it. So obviously that's not the clip that I want to be at. I should be recording 52 episodes a year. That's the way it should be, coming out every Friday, all year round, no breaks. So it's not like a serial podcast or a podcast where we have seasons. This is going to be, for me, I want it to be 52 weeks out of the year, every week putting out a new episode. And now that I've been able to start to put them in the queue, now my goal going forward is to build the queue up even more, to have 8 weeks, 10 weeks of content already in the queue, so that every Friday you get a new episode. And of course, if something happens, something unexpected happens, and I miss a week or even 2 of recording, not a problem. I've got things in the queue. And that's the beauty of having a movie podcast. So if I review a new movie, like I reviewed The Batman a couple of weeks ago, so obviously the great thing about having things in the queue is you're always going to have something coming out. But if I review a movie that's new, as opposed to an older film like I did this week with Defending Your Life, I'm able to slide that in, the following week. So what's probably going to be happening is, with some exceptions, if I get a new movie, I'll try to watch it that Friday and then review it, and have that review out the week following the movie's opening, which I think is still a pretty reasonable time. Some podcasts go 2 or 3 weeks when a new movie is open. So when a big movie opens, I'll review it that weekend. Hopefully I'll see it opening weekend, get the review in the can, and then that'll be the next episode. So if it opens on the Friday, then the following Friday will be the review of that film, so I can keep the current movies in there. And then the great thing about reviewing old films, like I do a lot, is then I can move those down the pike. They're not new movies. It's really having you discover movies that I love, or even movies that I didn't like very much, and there's no time sensitivity to those. So then that'll help me build my queue up. So we're reviewing older film that has been released, rewatches, however I decide to review a particular movie that's not brand new, I can record those way in advance, and then those will always be available. So that's kind of what the goal is going forward. And now that I've started to actually build towards that actual goal, for me, for you guys listeners, I know that's probably not a big deal, but for me it's a huge deal, because like I said, going forward, that's my commitment I want to make to the show, to make sure that I'm putting out an episode every single week. So I'm very happy about that. That just makes me even more engaged than I already am. So that's a little history of the podcast, kind of the evolution of the podcast. And like I said, I think my pivot over to doing movies only has been really beneficial for the podcast. And now this late night show, which is this is the second episode of it. So whether you come on live tonight or watching it, or if you watch it later on YouTube or on Facebook or on Twitter, this I'm going to use as for a couple of different things. Like I said, it's going to be a free form conversation. Hopefully, it'll help me improve as a podcaster as I do my regular episodes, to speak extemporaneously about movies, about the podcast itself. Hopefully, this will be a promotional tool for the podcast. Maybe people will tune into the show that have never heard the podcast and check it out based on what I talk about here. And this will just kind of be a catch-all for kind of, movie talk, podcast talk, information about the podcast itself, the evolution of the podcast, like I just explained now. So that's what I'm going to use this show for. So again, let me go ahead and before I forget, I'm going to put the live link. Give me a second here. I'll put the link in the chat room. And if, like I said, if you happen to buzz on and you, like I said, you can come on live if you want. So if you look in the chat room here, the link is there. Like I said, you just click on that link and it'll let me know you're there. And I can bring you on. Like I said, I can bring you on to audio only, where you won't be seen. Or we can do full audio video where you'll be split screen with me and we'll talk about whatever you'd like. So like I said, like when I do the live episodes, when I record the podcast, it's the same thing. It's open forum. So even if I'm talking about something in particular during this show, and like I said, I'll probably be on for I've been on 16 minutes. So I'll probably be on, assuming if nobody comes on, I'll probably be on another 15 minutes and then I'll sign off. But if somebody comes on here in the next 15 minutes and wants to talk movies with me, we'll extend past that. Like I said, we'll go as late as we want to go, as long as people are willing to talk. So to get the conversation started, I'm going to talk about the last couple of episodes. So I reviewed Defending Your Life, the Albert Brooks comedy, Afterlife comedy, which I enjoyed very much. It's a movie I hadn't seen in a long time and watched it. So check out that review. That's the episode that's up now. The episode before that was The Batman. So, of course, that's the new version of the Batman character, starring Robert Pattinson, directed by Matt Reeves. I gave that a very good review as well. And some teasing on some upcoming reviews. I just watched The Adam Project, which is a Netflix film with Ryan Reynolds, Jennifer Garner, and Mark Ruffalo. So that's going to be my next review. I may record that tomorrow, which is Thursday, and then post that one on Friday since that's a newer movie. So that might be this Friday's episode. I'm not positive yet, either this Friday or next Friday. If I can't get to record it tomorrow, I'll record it on Friday and then post it for next week. And then, like I said, you'll get a different episode this coming Friday. But there will be a new episode this Friday, as there will be episodes every single Friday, hopefully forever. As long as I want to do the podcast, there'll be a new episode every Friday, which is, again, the beauty of having a movie podcast. There's tens of thousands of movies that I've seen. I've only done, like I said, 90-something episodes, so there's plenty of content for me to discuss regarding movies that I've seen, whether it's new or especially older movies. So I'm looking forward to doing that. So like I said, you can catch those episodes every single Friday. So again, my reason for doing the podcast is, like I said, I am a movie buff. I have loved movies since I was a little boy. And I always talk about my top 5 movies of all time, which I always like to put out there. My top 5 movies of all time are not what I think are the 5 best movies ever made. When everybody makes lists, everybody does them for different reasons, and I like that. I like what people do for why they pick the movies that they love. There's a great podcast, actually. I'll plug a different podcast that's hosted by film director Joe Dante, co-hosted by Joe Dante, and Joss Olson, who is a writer. It's called The Movies That Made Me. So what they do is they have filmmakers on, people in the entertainment business. And the premise of that podcast, which is genius, is they have them come on with the movies that made them. So again, they have a list of maybe 10 movies, 5 movies, whatever. And the criteria is not your 5 favorite movies. It's literally the movies that made you. And that's how I picked my list. I did this list before I even heard that podcast, but I love it because that's perfect. It's the movies that made an impact on the guests' lives. And so specifically when they're interviewing screenwriters or actors or directors, when they talk to them, that's what they want to know. They don't want to know what your favorite movies are. It's not to say that those aren't on your list, but the movies that made you love movies, that made you make movies, that made you want to be an actor, that made you want to be a writer, that made you want to work in the Hollywood movie business. So for me, and I love talking about it, my top 5 movies are in no particular order: Citizen Kane, directed by Orson Welles; Goodfellas, directed by Martin Scorsese; Schindler's List, directed by Steven Spielberg; Raiders of the Lost Ark, also directed by Steven Spielberg; and Superman, 1978, directed by Richard Donner. Now, I've talked about this if you've listened to the podcast, but if you haven't, those five movies created the movie buff in me. So Superman 1978 was the first movie, and I had seen movies before then when I was little. My mom, actually, when I was still living in New York, took me to see a lot of the Disney live action films. So the Benji movies, Cat from Outer Space, Return to Witch Mountain, all those live action movies that came out in the 70s that Disney put out. So I went to the movies quite a bit when I was a kid, and I liked them. I liked the movies. But the movie that sparked, well, there was two, but the first movie that really sparked my passion for film, and I love telling the story because it's great, is Superman 1978. So I saw that in the movies. I was 8 years old when the movie came out, and it just blew me away, And I wasn't a reader of comic books. My exposure to Superman was the 1950s television series with George Reeves. That was on, television all the time at the time. Watching Superman on the big screen just blew me away. You believed a man could fly, which was the tagline of the movie. 8-year-old kid, but everything about that movie is perfect to me. From the opening credit sequence to the fantastic, which is still to this day my favorite John Williams score. And he's done so many great films and so many just iconic scores, but I still love and will always love Superman. His music for Superman is the best. The movie is perfect to me. The acting is great. Christopher Reeve is a fantastic Clark Kent and Superman. Gene Hackman, Lex Luthor. Just, the movie's phenomenal. The cast is phenomenal. Marlon Brando and his small part in it. So that really started the spark in my love for movies. What cemented it was 3 years later, 1981's Raiders of the Lost Ark. So that's why that's also in my top 5 movies. That movie, when I saw it, blew me away as well. Indiana Jones, that to me, and that is the perfect action adventure film. It's perfect. There's nothing wrong with it. And, my wife is a big fan. We have this of The Mummy, with Brendan Fraser, the first 2 mummies. I don't think she's a big fan of the third mummy. I don't think anybody is. But she loves those movies. Those movies were hugely successful. And I think they're a throwback to kind of Raiders of the Lost Ark. I'm not a huge fan of The Mummy. I think they're okay. But nothing to me beats Raiders of the Lost Ark. Now, the first trilogy, Temple of Doom, I've grown to love more over time. And Last Crusade reminds me of Raiders. And it's good. It's a very good film. Raiders of the Lost Ark is perfect. It's a perfect action adventure film. The script is phenomenal. The acting is phenomenal. The direction is phenomenal. Steven Spielberg at the height of his powers. So that's why that film resonates with me. So that came out in 1981. So through the 80s, I started to become passionate about movies, going to them, seeing them. So, of course, in the 80s, being a kid, I saw all of the classic. I'm lucky. I was in a great time for movies as far as those type of movies for my age group. So, I got to see Back to the Future, Goonies, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, The Breakfast Club, 16 Candles, all the movies that are, iconic. Ghostbusters, which I just reviewed, Ghostbusters Afterlife, Stripes, Meatballs, the Ivan Reitman comedies, and the great action movies, Lethal Weapon, 48 Hours, Midnight Run, in which a lot of I've reviewed already for the podcast. So those type of popcorn entertainment movies, but also as I was becoming a teenager, I started to become a movie buff in the sense that I was starting to seek out alternative fare. So by indie directors, I started to become a fan of John Sayles and watching his films. The writer-director that's made some fantastic movies, like 8 Men Out, Lone Star. Well, that was more in the 90s, but Secret of Rowan Inish. Just a great filmmaker and has made some fantastic films. Matewan, which I've reviewed for the podcast, which came out in 1987. That film is phenomenal. So that's one I highly recommend. So I kind of branched out into those films. So The next one on my list is so I've given you Raiders of the Lost Ark and Superman. So the next movie on my list is, if I'm going in chronological order, is Citizen Kane. So, of course, if even if you're not a big film buff, you probably know, if you have some knowledge of movies, that Citizen Kane is been considered for a long period of time the greatest American film. So there's some debate about that. Some people think it's The Godfather. Some people have other opinions. Casablanca. And I know there's I forgot the name of the magazine that every 10 years or 15 years does a polling of what the greatest movies are, and for a long period of time, Citizen Kane was the best film. So, of course, being a teenager, I had never really seen. Funny thing about Orson Welles was I had heard of Orson Welles. I knew him from the commercials he did late in his life, and I actually listened to, when I was younger, and I don't even know how I got it. I don't know if my mom bought it for me. I don't know. I actually listened to the War of the Worlds radio broadcast. So if you know the history of Orson Welles, or you may have known, he started in radio, and he did Shakespeare, and he started in radio with the Mercury Theater Players. So he did a radio broadcast of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. And he broadcast it on the radio like it was really happening, like there was an invasion of the Martians that was real. Played it straight, did it as a news story. It was so convincing that people all over the East Coast where he was broadcasting it thought that there was a real invasion, and they panicked. So he kind of became legendary from that. So he was in his early 20s when he did this, and he was given carte blanche to basically create from scratch a film at 25 years old. So he co-wrote, with Mankiewicz. He co-wrote, directed, and starred in Citizen Kane. So he's 25 years old and is doing this. First film, never done a movie before. So when I approached that film and watched it, you're almost looking for, okay, let's see if this movie's overrated. You kind of going, okay, I hear it's a classic, and I've seen scenes from it. It looks fantastic. So watching the film blew me away. It blew my expectations away. The cinematography by Greg Toland is genius, and I'll review Citizen Kane proper, but I saw what you could do with film with Citizen Kane. That's why it's in my top 5. And then, of course, it opened me up to be an Orson Welles fan. So, of course, I've seen Touch of Evil, Lady from Shanghai, The Trial, movies that he's directed. And then one of actually my favorite movies, which I have reviewed for the podcast, which he didn't direct, but no, I take that back. He did direct it. He directed it and starred in it, which is called The Stranger, which is a smaller film of his. I think it was 1948 it came out. And it starred him and Edward G. Robinson. So he plays a professor in a New England school that is actually a Nazi that's hiding. And Edward G. Robinson is a Nazi hunter and goes into town to try to find this guy. And it's it's kind of a noirish, really good. It's a tight, taut movie. It's like, I think it's 90 minutes, if that. Edward G. Robinson, who I'd never seen other than in the Ten Commandments, I believe he was in that. I hadn't really seen him, and actually in Double Indemnity too, so which another one I have to review. So I haven't really seen a lot of Edward G. Robinson. So as far as I'm concerned with my movie views, there's a lot of the older actors that I haven't really seen a lot of films on. A couple of examples. I mean, I've seen Jimmy Stewart in the Hitchcock films, but Edward G. Robinson, Montgomery Clift, actors that I need to go back and watch and see that I've never watched. But Edward G. Robinson is fantastic in The Stranger, as is Orson Welles. So a great movie. And I became a fan of Welles' work and read a lot of biographies. And so that's why Citizen Kane is on my list. So we've gone through Raiders, Superman, Citizen Kane. So that really deepened my love of film. So I'm going to go to 1990. So 1990, Goodfellas comes out by Martin Scorsese. So my exposure to Scorsese's work pre-1990 was a few films. I saw Raging Bull, which I liked. Saw Taxi Driver, which I liked. Saw Mean Streets, which I liked. And also saw The Last Temptation of Christ, which was the controversial movie that came out in 88 that Spielberg directed, starring Willem Dafoe, which I thought was actually a very fantastic and moving film, especially if you're a religious person. That movie really took a bad rap because people thought it was one thing, and it's really not. It's really an incredible film. So 1990, Goodfellas comes out. So I remember reading reviews at the time, how it's phenomenal, perfect movie, great gangster movie, best gangster movie ever. So I go and see it in the movies and just absolutely loved it. And for all the reasons, the cinematography, the direction, the acting, it's a 2.5, or I think it's 2 hour, 40-minute movie that moves lightning quick. And it's still to this day my favorite Scorsese film. And in my opinion, it is better than The Godfather. And I love The Godfather. But I love Goodfellas more because I think the approach Goodfellas took is what I like more, because it was a down and dirty, it was a lower level of gangster, where The Godfather, which is more operatic, cinematography is fantastic, beautifully shot, beautifully acted, phenomenal film. Godfather and Godfather Part 2. I'm actually one of the few people that like Godfather Part 3 for the most part. But Godfather 1 is phenomenal. But Goodfellas will always be my top gangster movie for me. And that's why it's in my top 5 of all time for myself. The movies that I love, that affected me, that made me a movie buff. So, and of course, that opened me up even to more Scorsese films. But like I said, that's still, to me, to this day, is still his best film. And it's not even close for me. So that leads me to my 5th and final film of my top 5. So 1993, Steven Spielberg directed, actually an incredible year for him. He directed Jurassic Park. And as he was in post-production for Jurassic Park, he started production on Schindler's List. So he went to Poland to shoot that film. And of course, if you know the story, it's the true story of Oskar Schindler, who was a war profiteer. So he hired Jews to work in his factory to make, bullets and ammunition for the Nazis. And if you know the story, obviously, if you haven't seen the movie, the story is, he hired a bunch of Jews, and as the Holocaust was proceeding, he started to hire more and more to keep them safe. And that's the basic premise of the story. And it's the thing about Schindler's List is when I went into that movie, I was going into that movie going, look, it's probably going to be, look, one of Steven Spielberg, who's phenomenal. And like I said, one of his other movies, Raiders of the Lost Ark, is in my top 5. And look, we're not even talking about all the movies he directed that are phenomenal, whether it's Jaws or E.T., which is still holds up to me. I'm watching it, and I know that E.T. is still one of Spielberg's favorite films of all the movies he's done. But with Schindler's List, he was able to take the Holocaust, and I think this was brilliant with the screenplay by Steve Zalen, because the Holocaust is such an awful, monumental, large-scale event, and he narrowed it down to this one story. And that's makes it even more impactful, to narrow all of that horrific death into the one story and to tell that single person story. And I think the other thing that made the movie unique is it's a great story of a person that he's doing this for the money at the beginning. Oskar Schindler he's not some hero in the traditional sense. He didn't have some sense of duty or anything. He was just looking to make a buck. And that's really why he did this. He saw an opportunity to make money, and he took advantage of it. And then as he saw what was happening, he evolved in the film and personally to where it became a moral imperative for him to try to save these people, because he saw what was happening and the madness that was happening. And that film is 3 hours long, shot in beautiful black and white by Janusz Kaminski. And it's just a fantastic film. And I haven't reviewed the movie proper for the podcast. I will. But I will say this little part about Schindler's List. For me personally, and it's why it's in my top 5 of all time, this is still the one and only film. I saw it with my best friend at the time. We saw the movie together. We left the theater. First of all, 2 things happened. When the movie finished, and this is the only time this has ever happened in my life of watching thousands of movies in the theater was silent. Like, there was no conversation, no talking. You could hear a pin drop when that movie finished. Driving home with my best friend, he was my roommate at the time, I don't think we said anything all the way home. Like, it was silent. That's how impactful that movie is. And that movie, to me, and not just because it's about the Holocaust, it's just the skill in which Spielberg was passionate about this subject, the screenplay, it's just him at the height of his powers. And I don't think it's an accident that Saving Private Ryan, even though he did The Lost World in between, Saving Private Ryan was his film after that, which is almost as phenomenal. But Schindler's List is a singular achievement. And again, I've never been silent like that after a film and have a film affect me that powerfully. And minor spoiler alert, if you've never seen Schindler's List, I was able to, all the things that happen in that film that are awful and just heart-wrenching, I was able to keep it together until the very end of the film, where Liam Neeson, as Oscar Schindler, talks about how he could have saved more people and how he's feeling awful even though he saved. That scene to this day still wrecks me. I was okay for the 3 hours previous, but that last 10 minutes of the movie destroys me every time. And that's why that movie's in my top 5. So again, my personal top 5, the movies that made me really love film is, like I said, is Schindler's List, Goodfellas, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Superman 78, and Citizen Kane. So those are my top 5 of all time. So if you're watching now live, if you want to tell me what your top 5 movies are, agree with my list, disagree with my list, or if you want to talk about anything about movies, I'm going to be on probably another few minutes. So if you're watching now, if you just want to chat, just come into the chat room here. Tell me where you're watching. Are you watching on Twitch, Facebook? Let me know. If you want to come on the show, the link is in the chat room. If you don't see it, just pop up in the chat and I'll put the link in there. I can have you come on live. We can talk for a few minutes about movies. I can either have you come on audio only or video. You can split screen with me and we can talk movies. So again, that's my top 5 movies of all time. Like I said, I'll talk about them throughout when I do the podcast. So again, this show is a promotional show for my podcast, Let Me Bend Your Ear podcast, which is a movie podcast where I discuss and review movies new and old. So again, I'll be on here for a few minutes live. You can watch this show later on YouTube or on Facebook or on Twitter. Like I said, I'm live on Twitch right now, but they don't archive them, so the show won't be on Twitch. It's only when I'm on live, and if you happen to pop on while I'm on Twitch, you can chat with me there. So again, I invite you to check out the podcast. You can find the audio podcast wherever you get podcasts, and you can go to the website and download all the episodes you like at your leisure. The website is letmebendyourear.com. And like I said, all the episodes from episode 1 to now are there. And like I said, the last 10 episodes that I've done video podcast of are there, and then going forward the video podcast will be there as well at the website. It'll link you over to the YouTube channel. If you want to go directly to YouTube, that's fine. The YouTube channel is Let Me Bend Your Ear podcast. So if you subscribe to that channel, when I do go live, whether it's for the late night show that I'm doing now or for the regular podcast, you'll get notifications when I go live. And again, anytime I'm live, you'll have the ability to come on or chat with me, like I said, in the show, in the chat room, either way you want to do it. Like I said, I had someone on the last show comment from Twitch, and we were talking through the chat, and I was responding to the chat to them. They didn't want to come on, which is fine. Like I said, I can do it either way. So again, this is Late Night with Frank G. I am the host of the Let Me Bend Your Ear podcast, where I discuss and review movies new and old. It is my passion. Like I said, I've loved movies since I was a child, and it's a love that I've had my entire life. And I love doing this show. I love doing the podcast. It's something that brings me a great amount of joy. And the thing I always say on the podcast, and I'll say this here before I probably sign off, find something you're passionate about. I know this last couple of years in this world has been kind of insane. And do something you love doing. Man, life's too short. And I love doing this podcast. It makes me happy. I love talking movies. I love talking movies with people, whether it's on social media, whether it's my friends, whether it's people responding to episodes that I've done or commenting. Like I'll just a quick story here. I saw on Twitter today. You can interact with me on Twitter at Bend Your Ear Pod. I love talking to you guys about movies there. Like my most recent episode that's up now, which is Defending Your Life. And I just had someone comment today that they love that movie and that they're going to check the podcast out because they love that movie. So I love to hear that. I love to hear people tell me movies they like, tell me movies they don't like. It's always fun conversation to have because movies is a universal thing. And I love that. I think there's a lot of things in this country in this world that kind of separates us. Movies are something that kind of unites us. Everybody has a type of movie that they like. And that's something that we can all talk about. That things that we have in common, even if we don't like the same movies, it doesn't really matter. The love of movies around the world is fantastic. So I love talking about it. So again, I'm going to sign off here in a moment. Again, like I said, I'm going to plug the podcast one more time. It's the Let Me Bend Your Ear podcast. You can listen wherever you get your podcasts. It's on Spotify, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, Stitcher, TuneIn, Castbox, and Amazon Music. Like I said, you can get all the video episodes at the YouTube channel, Let Me Bend Your Ear podcast. The Facebook page is facebook.com/Let Me Bend Your Ear. The Twitter handle is at Bend Your Ear Pod. That is also the Instagram handle and also the handle for Twitch. So please, follow me in all those social medias. If you hit me up on Twitter, I will respond. If you follow me, I'll follow you back. Like I said, the purpose of this late night show and the podcast, like I said, is to help grow the podcast. So hopefully, if you're a fan of it, thank you for listening. If you were just checking this show out and liked what you heard, hopefully you'll go to the podcast and check it out and give me your thoughts. You can email the show at bendyourearpodcast.com. Again, that's bendyourearpodcast at gmail.com. So bendyourearpodcast at gmail.com is the email if you want to suggest movies for me to review, talk about the show, give me your comments on the show, or just talk movies. Definitely email me, but definitely hit me on Twitter. I'll definitely respond. I love talking to people there about movies. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off. I want to thank everybody that watched. If you watch later, like I said, thank you for watching the show. And more importantly, thank you for listening to the podcast. Like I said, I'm going to try to do more of these Late Night with Frank G episodes so I can just basically freeform and talk about movies. Like I said, my next review is going to be The Adam Project, a Netflix film with Ryan Reynolds. I'm either going to record it tomorrow to upload Friday, or I'll record it Friday to upload next week. But there'll be a new episode regardless on Friday anyway. It'll either be just The Adam Project or one of the reviews I have in the queue. So again, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. I will see everybody again soon, and hopefully you'll check out the podcast. I hope everybody has a fantastic